Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks to the organizer for giving me the opportunity to address this group. And step back a little bit and reflect upon what we've heard in the last couple of days. We've heard amazing things about science, about what is possible, what's around the corner. And since my area of expertise is innovation, I'd like to perhaps contribute some thoughts about when are we going to see all that? Is it going to be, like a mirage? The closer you get to it, the further away it seems to get from you. That's often the case in science. Or are we going to, really see it soon and benefit from it? This is, I've got a few slides, not too many. This is the points that I'm going to make. I heard yesterday something that was a bit disturbing, and that is aging is not really recognized as a disease. It's recognized as something normal. And I think there's some truth to that, and it's a little bit problematic because if it's not a disease, what are we trying to fix? So we'll talk about that. Along with that comment, I heard something else, and it is there is no real baseline to characterize, to define what healthy aging is. And this is another problem because unless we have a baseline data to define what healthy aging is, we're not going to be able to get anything approved by FDA, since FDA can only approve therapies that measure improvement over something. And if we don't know what that something is, we're going to have some problem there. So we're going to talk about that too. All of you, by virtue of being there, by virtue of what you do, are participating in the ongoing transformation of medicine and science, which is highlighted by what I call the digitization of science and medicine. And that has some far-reaching consequences because it is changing the economics of research, the economics of drug R&D, and also the power relationships between physicians, patients, and industry in a way that I think will have some interesting consequences for what we've talked about in the last couple of days. And one of those consequences is that patients who have played, I think, even though they're central to all that we do, and we often claim that we do everything in the name and for the patients, in fact, they've played so far a fairly peripheral role in medicine and in drug R&D, and that is about to change. Patients are about to move to the center of the biomedical research enterprise, and it has some very interesting consequences, one of which is that perhaps we haven't defined very clearly what healthy aging is, and perhaps we don't have a lot of baseline data to characterize what it is, but patients, believe me, they get it. They know what it is intuitively. And because of that, I think we can be fairly confident that it will happen. So the challenge ahead of us is that aging is currently not seen or recognized as a disease, seen from the eyes of the of many people. Aging is the problem with aging have more to do with a disease to which it is associated, like neurodegenerative disease, like age-related macular degeneration, hearing loss. This is what we typically talk about when we talk about the problem of aging. So if aging is not recognized as a disease, what are we talking about? What we're trying to solve? Are we dealing with a solution in search of a problem? FDA cannot really function, cannot really approve a therapy unless it can measure an improvement over something. if we haven't really defined very clearly what healthy aging is, then they're not going to be able to do much to help make it happen. So that's something that we need to be mindful of, and it's important because if we pause for a second and try to put a definition to healthy aging, we can probably come up with some reasonable things, like healthy aging translates into delayed onset of age-related diseases. That makes sense. It also translates into an improvement in quality of life metrics. That also is reasonable. But if you try to gather the data that supports such definition, so that you would have something that to show to the regulators, for example, and if you try to do that in a traditional framework of drug R&D, it's going to be very, very difficult and very, very costly and very, very lengthy, to the point that it probably will not happen. So, unfortunately, I think the drug R&D model, the biomedical research model, is starting to undergo some pretty radical transformation that is going to change that problem into an opportunity. So new technology, So we have the old model that we know, where medicine is controlled by physicians who know best, something that some people have called eminence-based medicine. Drug R&D is controlled by the industry, and there's nothing malevolent there. It's just that it's so expensive that the pharmaceutical industry is basically the only party that has the resources to afford the cost. And because of this, scale is essential to the model, but scale is expensive. And this basically, the cost of scale, the cost of operating that model are so high that it tends to cap the amount of innovation that is reaching the patients. Something that has been documented now for several years, which amazes a lot of people, is that no matter what we do in the industry, and we've tried a lot of things, the drug output is basically constant year after year after year for a given company. It only increases with the amount of companies. So we've got some inherent limitation in that old model. Now we're seeing the emergence of a new model where patients are no longer treated like a nuisance, like an epiphenomenon, but are basically becoming central to the model. Patients are becoming experts. And they're becoming experts because they have instant access to enormous amount of information and vast networks of information that can be summoned very quickly to answer basically any question. Patients, and that means all of us, by the way, are becoming demanding. They are not willing to put up with the inconvenience of the medical system as they've been known to exist. They don't want to wait to make an appointment. They don't want to wait hours to see a physician. They want instant care or near instant care at any time, wherever they are. And they're starting to get it. Patients have power because the data that fuel the system ultimately comes out of their body, and technology increasingly puts them in control of the collection of that data. And in biomedical research, whoever controls data collection ultimately controls innovation. Patients have started to realize that and I've started to affirm that power. So new technology which is mediating basically those changes, is changing the biomedical research, is changing the economics of that research, and as I mentioned earlier, the power relationship between the key stakeholders, which are patients, physicians, and industry. So I have a son who is an engineer. He works for Caterpillar. And when he started to work a few years ago, he explained to me that big pieces of equipment, he works in a mining division where they have big excavators and big trucks and that sort of thing. And those big pieces of equipment are riddled with sensors that monitor the performance of key parts. 24 hours a day, 7 days per week. And the data as it is collected is sent wirelessly to the cloud, where it accumulates for this excavator as well as for all the other, of a similar model. And down the road, when a part breaks down somewhere, the engineers can refer to the cumulative data that has been gathered and have something to help them understand what went wrong, why this part failed, and how they can improve design so that the next iteration of that part is less prone to failure. And I thought, gee, this is really interesting. Why can't we have the same thing for medicine? I mean, you have, I was reading yesterday, something like 480 sensors in your car. You have, I don't know how many dozen in your cell phone. Why can't we have that to monitor, our body functions, so that when we get sick, we have a rich personal history that physician can access in order to try to understand what went wrong. And it's increasingly important since a lot of the disease or age-related diseases have been brewing long before they become clinical. I mean, it's pretty clear in the case of Alzheimer's, for example, or Parkinson. So by the time we get clinical today, in the old model, we have zero data over that, stealthy period. And if we don't have any data, we cannot really do science. We cannot really understand what's going on or innovate. So it's important that we seize the opportunity that technology is giving us to basically put us at par with excavators and big trucks and cars and those sort of things. Thankfully, that transformation of biomedical research is coming fast. I live in the city of Indianapolis, and over there, everybody knows the McLaren Car Company. McLaren Car Company is a British company that started doing some interesting things a few years back when they decided to outfit their cars with literally hundreds of biosensors, a couple of hundreds for each car. And in a typical Grand Prix race, each one of those cars will collect about 1 billion data points on a performance of the engine and the key parts of that car. That data is subsequently analyzed to help design better cars, better parts, and more reliable engines. GlaxoSmithKline, which is a neighbor of McLaren in England, decided to perhaps try to harness the expertise of McLaren, and they've done a collaboration, and GlaxoSmithKline has started to innovate in that space by outfitting patients with sensors that collect a lot of data about various diseases. And that's been going on now for a couple of years. And one company that I work with, company by the name of Medidata in New York City, a couple of years ago decided to actually team up with GlaxoSmithKline to test the power of those biosensors and see what they could really do. There was a lot of hype, how much of the hype was true? Was there any reason to get all excited about that? Was it going to be really transformative? So they designed a trial on a population of a couple of hundred of diabetics. They outfitted those diabetics with a couple of low-cost biosensors to monitor vital signs and electrocardiogram and that sort of thing. And they decided they started to collect data. With that limited number of biosensors, they were able to collect as much as 18 million data points per patient and per day. 18 million. They subsequently audited that data, took it to FDA, and the data was declared to be FDA compliant. In fact, someone at FDA commented that this was more data that had been accumulated in the entire history of clinical research since the beginning of time. And it was basically collected at no cost. Those monitoring devices, once you buy them, they collect data at near zero marginal cost. And this is important because if you had tried to collect 18 million data points per patient and per day over a period of a couple of months, it would have been a very, very expensive bill, let me tell you. And those of you who are involved in clinical research know what I mean. So we have technology that is coming to the fore that is basically changing the economics of data collection. And will that be transformative? Someone pushed back at one of the presentations that I gave about a year ago by saying, it won't change anything. Genomics was supposed to change everything. And it did change some things, but far less than had been anticipated. I think the situation in a case of wearable and biosensing technology is a little bit different. I think what we're seeing emerge is summarized in that slide here, where you have now hundreds of devices, literally, that monitors hundreds of biomarkers that touch about every facet of physiology. And all those signals are processed by smartphone, which have become ubiquitous. They're the hub, so to speak. The first smartphone broadcast those signals to the cloud, where they accumulate in that patient space in the cloud, alongside other signals collected from the sensors that may exist in a patient's home or in a patient's car, like smart seat, for example, or smart bed, or smart everything. We're seeing now a new trend in technology, which is the smartification of objects. There's a lot of things on the drawing board and already in existence. If you touch them, they'll collect data, biomedical data about you. And sometimes you don't even have to touch them. You just have to get close to them and they'll collect data. A couple of years ago, I was invited to make a presentation in Korea. And so it was a government invitation, so they put us up in a nice, show hotel. And I remember my surprise when I entered the bathroom and they had this toilet seat with a smart seat, smart toilet seat. And so it has those buttons, on the side, and it's all in Korean language, so I didn't understand anything about it. It was tempting to, push those buttons to see what would happen. But this is when you hope that everything is going to be as intended. But this is the sort of thing that we're talking about. you have, and when you think about it, a toilet seat can collect a lot of very interesting data about you on a routine basis. And not only seats, but just about every other thing in a household. So that's the infrastructure that basically is coming into place and that is collecting, or at least has a potential to collect, literally millions of data points per day for each one of us. As I said, hundreds of biomarkers can already be monitored. This is just a short list of what is possible. Vital sign, sleep, emotion, stress, breathing, movement, effort, EKG, EAGs, blood glucose, oxygenation, posture, gait, diseases, body shape, skin lesion, mental acuity, environmental toxin, patient adherence, and you go on and on and on. Basically, if you can imagine something that is biomedically relevant, if it cannot be measured yet, it will soon, you'll soon have that capability. And I was at a conference at a university recently, and so I talked about this device that I picture here. It's called an Alive Core. You can buy it on Amazon.com. It costs $70, and it allows you to give yourself electrocardiograms. It's been approved by FDA, by the way, and it allows you to give yourself electrocardiograms as frequently as you want. So I talk about that, and at the end of my presentation, there's somebody works to me, and he said, "Thank you." And I said, "For what?" He said, "Well, I'm a PhD chemist. I never heard about this Alive Core thing. My wife is a physician. She's never heard about it either. I happen to have atrial fibrillation, and monitoring myself has been an issue. As you were talking about this thing and went online, I looked at the reviews. They were great. I bought myself one of those things. It'll arrive tomorrow. So this is how things happen. And if you were to try to, go to a hospital for an electrocardiogram, the average cost would be on, $1,500. So you go from basically zero to $1,500, or from $1,500 to zero. This is a sort of improvement in economics that we're about to see. So to summarize, if you look at the infrastructure that is coming together, we have digitized science and medicine. A lot of the knowledge that used to be proprietary, deep knowledge about biology, about chemistry, about toxicology, is today available in databases that are mostly free. You don't really need to work for big pharmaceutical companies in order to do heavy-duty research, powerful research, as was the case just a few years back. We see increasing number of companies that are one-person company, or so-called virtual companies, half a dozen people or less, that are using all those tools in order to pursue interesting hypotheses, in order to do bold science. They can access crowdsourcing platform to do a lot of those things that they're doing without building scales. It is a lot cheaper to be an entrepreneur to do than it used to be. So all those things are, very interesting developments. You've all heard about the $1,000 genome. It's actually cheaper than that. And for a little more, you can have also your microbiome sequenced. I talked about the biosensing technologies. You also have, the apps, the plug-in devices, the smart objects. There's 40,000 treatment-related diseases on the Google and Apple App Store. We have the wireless transmission. We have the cloud. We have, a million people cohorts that are either enrolling or on a drawing board and will soon enroll. Just at the beginning of 2015, I remember being at meetings at NIH when the concept of enrolling millions of people in a cohort was fairly bold. Today, I mean, it's popping up all over the place. And those cohorts, once they get connected, will provide resources that are probably equivalent to hundreds, if not thousands, of Framingham, heart studies, which we've seen over the decades, how much contribution it has made to science. We have, Watson, artificial intelligence to analyze the data. So in other words, we have everything already in existence, everything that we need to junk the old biomedical research model and embrace a new, richer, more efficient, much cheaper research model. We don't need to invent anything else. It's already all there. We just need to use it. So what does that mean for society? Well, it means that patients are getting increasingly engaged in that data collection. Patients are getting involved in their health, which is good because we're all pre-symptomatic patients for one disease or another. So as we collect data about our health, we implicitly also collect data that years down the road can be summoned to explain things that will be happening to us. And the data will be rich enough that hopefully scientists will be able to make sense of diseases that today elude us. But also that data collected on millions of people will give us a capability to research many more diseases in parallel than we've been able to do it in the past. It is not uncommon today to see patients that are impatient, no pun. They want innovation right now. They don't want to wait. They don't want to wait for somebody to develop an interest in a patient. They want a treatment right now. And if no one pays attention to their disease, well, they take it in their own hands and they start collecting data and they put that data in open free access and they invite the scientific community to take a look at it. It's typically, curated data, high quality, very rich. We all know that in typical research project, the collection, the curation of data is 80% of the time and 80% of the cost, and is typically not the most rewarding part of the project. If somebody comes to you and said, hey, save yourself all that trouble, here it is, work on my diseases, they'll get some attention, and they're getting some attention. So this is good. Multi-million patient cohorts are being created and connected. From a public health standpoint, we're seeing the development of high-quality telehealth application, telemedicine, imaging. You can now take your cell phone, smartphone, with the million megapixel cameras that it has, and turn that into a lens-free microscope that has enough resolution to image parasites, in some cases to image viruses, and it costs nothing. You can, put it in a stand that you can 3D print or even build out of cardboard for less than $1. So a lot of people who could not afford medicine, either in this country or in poorer countries, will soon have the capability to access those services. And I think that will have a significant impact on the public health of the nation, of the world. And patients are really the one that are driving that. It's their health. They want innovation. They are engaged in collecting and they're willing to collect data about themselves and to contribute that data to biomedical research. However, patients also have values that are important to them, values that they believe will stimulate innovation and overall are good for science and are good for patients. And those values are speed, transparency, patient relevance, convenience, personalization, affordability, and they expect the organization to which they will contribute their data to uphold those values. They're increasingly foisting those values over the entire biomedical research enterprise. And this is new and probably will be very beneficial to all of us as patients. So it will happen because the patients want it. Thank you very much.